And welcome back. We are live for another Leadership and Legal Live.
And legal.
That's right. You can't skip the legal piece. For those of you joining us for the first time, my name is Steve Loez. I'm the founder and CEO of Qualigence International. James, why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm James Reed, a partner at Dinsmore and Shohl, employment attorney, and also the director of Michigan SHRM.
Thank you again for taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
For those of you that, if this is your first time joining, we are streaming on Zoom, we are on LinkedIn Live, we are on Facebook Live, we are on YouTube, and for the first time, we're actually on Clubhouse. So we're going to figure this social media thing out. I don't know if Clubhouse is going to be any help, or I don't know. We'll see.
I'm very active on drafting social media policies, and Clubhouse is new to me. So maybe I already learned something new.
We'll figure this out at some point.
Yeah.
So if you are joining us for the first time, the whole idea behind Leadership and Legal, and James, chime in on this, is to answer or at least give our opinions and thoughts on some of the tough questions that you're thinking, but maybe don't want to ask. Because I'll tell you that the majority of the questions we've been getting have been coming through anonymous.
They'll be very controversial today.
So we're going to hit some categories, right? So the whole point is, again, if you're watching us for the first time, think about questions that you wanted to ask that maybe you didn't already send us, because we'll give you an opportunity at the end to send us those questions, text us those questions, or if you're open to it, put it up on social media. That's fine as well. But we've categorized them for this discussion. So there was a few additions and changes from what we set. And here's the key areas that we're going to try to hit is diversity, which has been popular. Mm-hmm. Different questions than we've had before, some related. Back to work and back to school.
Yep.
Employee engagement. We know there's going to be a huge turnover this year.
Huge.
And we're already seeing it.
Yep.
Already seeing it. Recruiting and selection, which is tied into this. General leadership in business. Team performance. And if we get to the last one, religion.
Those are all great topics.
So we're going to see how this all plays out, Jim.
Yeah.
So I want to kind of go in order on this. I don't know who sent this, but here's the question I came across. There's a lot of legal pieces to this.
Yes.
I work in a very diverse environment. I get complaints stating racism as the reason certain people feel like they're being treated differently by others. After investigating, so I'm assuming this is probably an HR person.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to have anything to do with racism. Now, again, I assume that's their opinion.
Right.
How do you tell people to stop inappropriate labeling things as racism tactfully? And how do you stop this when the BLM movement is still at its height? Ooh.
Now, this is a great question because I feel like it could be a dozen clients of mine that sent that in because I'm dealing with that on a daily basis. And about 90% of discrimination claims, once they go through the equal employment opportunity process, there's no finding of any evidence to support discrimination 90% of the time. So what people do when they're treated unfairly, the first thought in their head is discrimination or illegal or retaliation or bullying. And I think what we need to do is have those employees not talk in terms of conclusions.
Right.
Give us the facts. So I would try to create a culture where you focus on the 7 W's. So my son's in first grade, he learns how to tell a story. Who, what, where, when, why.
You've used that a number of times. And I think that's a great way to look at it.
And I need to know witnesses and what do you want.
Yeah.
But ideally, if you already have a diverse company, I think people will realize the claim could be pretty weak because why would you have all this diversity if you really hated a certain protected class?
But the one thing I like about this is that whoever sent this in said, I investigated.
Yeah.
I took the time. I took the complaint and the concern seriously. And even though you're saying 90%, there's no real basis, I guess, from a legal perspective. The fact that the person is taking it serious and is asking the questions, I think, is probably the key here.
That's the key. Do you want to take an investigation step within 7 days? Because if you don't, you could potentially allow that hostile work environment to continue without understanding.
Okay.
And then second, you want to make sure that you are, gathering the facts, and maybe the resolution is not terminating somebody. It could be policy reminder. It could be updating your messaging and your policies, or it just could be teaching a better communication style. So
do you think there's any, from and this is not a legal question, James, but do you think there's any truth to one of the things I've been hearing is there's so much talk about racism that we're often bringing it to the table when it's really not there because we think we need to?
You're right. It's almost like a stock market right now. We've talked about Bitcoin being up right now.
Right.
So right now, BLM cases are at a peak.
Yeah.
So if somebody can find one employee that has that claim, it's plaintiff attorneys salivate, regardless if there's any merit to that case right now. So I think we got to be, I guess, realists and extra aware of how things could be interpreted on social media as well.
Sure. Well, but in fairness, there are, even if it's only 10%, there are real claims. That's why we need to really
There are real
investigate.
claims,
Yeah.
and I think what is misunderstood is the real claims doesn't have to be someone part of the KKK. It could be unconscious bias.
Sure.
So we got to start looking at our statistics and see if there's anything we're potentially factoring in that we shouldn't in a workplace issue.
So let's go down that path a little bit more, because I know you do some training around diversity, inclusion, equity, inclusion, and so on.
Right.
What are you really trying to get out there when you're doing that type of training, or when I'm doing that type of training? In your particular instance, what are you trying to communicate so that you avoid some of this stuff, address the bigger problem? You know, what's the key message?
The key message is everyone can do better.
Agreed.
And we want our team to be part of the solution, not the problem. So if you think we don't have enough diversity, help us refer someone that you're looking for. That if you don't think we're searching in the right avenues for people and talent, help us identify where to search.
Now let me put it out there, because you're watching two white guys talk about diversity, and we've gotten blasted for this before. We've had a number of guests on, Dan Russell, Jake, and others. So I would encourage you to look at the recorded Leadership and Legal, and we will continue to add diversity. Our next one, we'll have some female representation again, and so on. So we hear it, but we're giving our opinions to start, and we'll bring in other opinions as we continue.
So I think the answer is see if there's any issues going on. So an EEO1 report is required for companies that are 100 employees and up.
Yeah.
And the Biden administration and the EEOC are trying to make that apply even more broadly. California just passed a law this year that requires any company with 50 or more employees to do this. And what that report would do is it would show wage comparison based on gender, race, national origin. So rather than be forced to do it, maybe just do your own internal audit and see if you think you're paying people fairly across the board, regardless of a perceived protected class, even though there's nothing there intentionally.
So could that cause if the state of Michigan, we're in the state of Michigan, other people could be watching this from anywhere, but if our governor came in and said, you now have to report all this, no matter what size company, are there potentially negative implications of that to an employer?
There are negative implications, because let's say when you're recruiting talent, Steve, do you ask candidates how much they're making?
Well, there's again, depending on the state, there's legalities around that.
And even if there's not a state that bans it, is someone going to claim you're asking me because I'm a woman, and you want to continue the discrimination of a previous employer? So I think the issues by having this is we're going to potentially get statistic lawsuits that you're going to get FOIA'd because from this information.
Freedom of information.
People are going to know how we're paying our people and our competitive margins and edge. And
that could kill a business potentially.
And there could be perceptions, even if the reason why you're paying this white male more is because maybe they have these results that are off the charts isn't necessarily because they're a white male. That could be misinterpreted based on the plain vanilla statistics.
Well, and that's actually key. One of the things that we teach is this idea of what we call results-based selection, right? Select candidates based on results, which eliminates some of the bias stuff. But it also creates a scenario, if you're really clear about the results, that you could end up paying more for somebody that looks the same, has the same pedigree, but all of a sudden, because they're either a white male or a white female or something, it looks like they're getting paid exorbitantly more, but it's based truly off of their results, at least theoretically, right?
I think, though, there's also challenges that it's not just having an equal opportunity, it's equity. So And I think that's hard to factor in when measuring results if they're really getting the same opportunities and the same help as needed to have that chance to succeed.
That's fair. But I've got a second question.
Yes.
That still falls around this idea of diversity. So should specific diversity hiring goals, and we've actually addressed this once before, should specific diversity hiring goals be tied to executive compensation and bonuses? This is already happening. Is it legal? Is the intent right? What are the negative impacts? Can it be done legally? Should it be done legally? How should it be done if you do it? Whole crap load of questions in there. What's the legal perspective?
The legal perspective is quotas are illegal, blatantly.
Right.
And I think, though, what the intent may be on a legal policy is we believe there's a better ROI and better client origination and business needs if we have a diverse workforce. It's not just race or gender, it's different styles and personalities and cultures. And if we do that, we'll have more revenue at the end of the year.
Right.
So I would rather, maybe encourage someone to get different diverse people coming together, and diverse I mean more broadly than just race and gender.
It's not a black or white thing. It goes beyond the black and white thing.
And I would still want to reward on results. I would not want to say, by the way, I'm getting plaintiff attorneys call me and say, James, I see that the white male CFO was replaced by a minority. You know what's going on here in the world. Can I get a year severance for my client?
Yeah.
I said, well, do you have any basis that the white male was terminated solely for being a white male, or maybe he wasn't performing as well, and they believe that another person could perform better? But that's the culture that plaintiff attorneys are bringing right now.
And from a leadership perspective, I kind of take issue with it as well. I think the intent, and I have clients that their executive bonuses are tied directly into specific numbers, even though it's legally not supposed to. They don't lay it out that way. But when I've got them coming to me saying, I got to hit this number because my bonus, okay, I know it's happening. I kind of take an issue with it because it's like buying people off, because they're not having the conversation that you just had, which I encourage all of my clients to do, is let's convince people to do it because it makes business sense, not because it just makes sense to your pocketbook. Because are we setting people up to fail? So let's just say I hire an African American female or an Asian female because I want to hit a number, but yet the job is not right for them in the first place. What have I just done? I've set them back even further, which I think is crazy.
Right. No, it's a major challenge. And I think on top of that, certain customers now that don't have diversity internally are basically doing a public mission statement that we're only going to work with vendors essentially that are diverse. And now you have issues where you're forced to have a certain hire just to get the business, when even they may not have the skill set to support the business as much as you would otherwise.
Which isn't fair to anybody. It's not addressing the problem. It's putting a Band-Aid on the symptom, which doesn't fix. It doesn't solve.
It's a backdoor quota as well, which is a problem.
Which I think is great. So the answer to that is no, they shouldn't be tied specific numbers legally. And even non-legally, if in your organization, think about the damage and what you're teaching. If you're saying just put a number on it, teach the value of it, because there is absolutely enough empirical evidence that says there is value, and follow that train of thought.
True, but the laws are being more progressive than ever under the Biden administration and in certain states. So to give you an example, California again, and I believe some Fortune 500 companies, you have to have a certain amount of women on the board.
Yeah.
So there is pressure in a way to essentially have a quota.
So it's interesting you bring that up. So prior to starting Leadership in Legal, we have been doing video for a long time. One of the videos, and we'll post it up on social later, as soon as California enacted that law, I had a conversation with two females, a millennial and somebody who is now since retired, both females, to get their thoughts on that particular law, and was it helpful in their opinion to females, or was it hurtful? Take a look. I'm not even going to give you the answer, but I'm going to tease you with it. Take a look at that video. We'll post it out on social media later this afternoon, just to get their perspective. Not mine, not yours, but two different females from two different backgrounds, let's call it.
Well, it's the same kind of concept with the Me Too movement. Are older white males more hesitant to truly mentor women, given the perception that just by having that relationship could be inappropriate?
That's actually a really great point. I mean, boy, I guess I hadn't really thought about it. My wife's probably saying, you should have thought about that. but I guess I hadn't thought about it in those terms. Could it be misconstrued if you show too much attention, too much caring, and could that open the door? Potentially, it could open the door.
I'm seeing lawsuits where my boss checked me out with his eyes and they want a year severance. That's the plaintiff's bar. So I think there's also an EEOC fiscal year report, and there was more lawsuits and litigation than ever. And I only anticipate it being another all-time high in 2021. So employees are feeling more empowered than ever to bring claims.
Look, if you're taking offense to this conversation, this is not about everybody agreeing with each other. It's about having the dialogue. You want to come in and you want to talk about your opinion on this thing, please do. So as Terry Bean, one of our previous guests, would always say, the social discourse needs to happen, or we're never going to address these problems.
And my whole definition of diversity is if you're not willing to hear different points of view, you're not committed to diversity.
Agreed. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk COVID, but from a different angle, and it's all about the returning to work and returning to school. The question is because of what was going on in Chicago recently. Yeah. So teachers' unions are fighting to stop in-person learning. What advice do you have both for parents and employers? What are the potential negative impacts of this? Meaning, we've talked about this before too. When is it too early to bring an employee back? But even if your kids have to stay home, what's the potential impact of that to the mom and dad or the significant other or what have you, positive and negative?
So starting with the negative, Johnny Taylor during his Michigan SHRM keynote speech said I think it was either 300,000 plus women are out of jobs now, in large part due to the stay-at-home from school environment. So I guess arguably that setbacks women.
Agreed.
And then I think on top of that, there are studies where the virtual education, especially for lower levels, is not as effective as in-person education. And the caregiving issues as well is a major issue. Where I'm seeing a lot of schools have challenges is they're offering sometimes a hybrid model, and you have to double the costs and efforts of both versions. I have a particular client who's challenged with this issue. They said Whitmer had this plan in Michigan where depending on what phase you're in, you could do certain things.
Right.
So they said if you're in phase 4, you can pick if you want to be virtual or in person. But phase 5, you have to be back in person because in person is more effective. However, Whitmer has not updated what phase we're in since October. And
I didn't realize that.
So she does this message. It'd be great for people to go back to school in March, but a lot of my clients are like, can we force teachers back? And
which is what's happening in Chicago.
Which is what's happening in Chicago. So it's a very dangerous area to force somebody. I think that you should encourage, but if you can have some evidence where people are having issues, then I think you'd have an argument to force it if legally allowed. Yeah,
I think the first piece that you actually referenced is something that not everybody's taking into consideration. Yes, it impacts the kids. I mean, I looked at a study last night. 27.4% were experiencing mild depression staying home. 22.8% had mild generalized anxiety disorder for staying home. 38.6% are now experiencing insomnia. These are the kids. But the thing that you started with, I think, is incredibly important here is the broader impact it's having on society. Women in particular, I keep hearing that is they got to stay home. They have to be with them. So they're either not able to work if their employer doesn't allow them to, or the job didn't allow them to potentially work. They've had to take a step back when we're trying to push them forward. There's all kinds of issues related to that.
Yeah, another hot issue is employers are letting the women work remotely, but not the men, which is a whole other issue. Men got to come in person. Or if you have kids, you can work remotely. If you don't have kids, I expect you in the office. And Michigan actually has a protected class where you can't take family status into account.
Really?
Yeah.
So what do you do in that? What can a person do if my wife who if she was not allowed to go to work but I had to go to work, could I sue?
Anybody can sue. So the question is, what are your damages? Typically, if you're not fired, the monetary damages are not significant.
Yeah.
It's more of a social media issue.
Yeah, that makes it's a tough one because I think they finally settled in Chicago and they were worried about transmissions and all that. And then when you start looking at the data around, are the kids transmitting it? Are the teachers susceptible? It depends on who's presenting the data because they both show the exact opposite.
Yeah, right.
It's like crazy.
No. And then one more fact is there's a 300% increase in suicide rates.
Yeah.
And what I'm seeing across the board is alcoholism.
Through the roof.
It's through the roof. Beer sales are through the roof.
Liquor.
And people can now get drunk when they're working remotely because when they have their camera off on Zoom or whatever platform they're using, they could be sipping a beer and...
I for the first going along this, and this is kind of a side note, but here in Michigan, you can now get marijuana delivered to your house if you don't want to go out.
Right.
Okay, whatever your view of whether it's legal, not legal, that's insanity to me.
Right. And on top of that, people are taking it for therapeutic reasons.
Yes.
For depression and anxiety that may be temporary. So to do that while you're at work and not being monitored at all, when the cat's away, some mice will play.
I think that's going to come up again. The topic of marijuana has come up a couple times in our discussions, but let's not veer too far onto that one. But if you've got questions on that, especially from a legal perspective, you've done a lot of research on this.
We have a whole department. It's all they focus on.
Yeah. All right. So that's the back to work, back to school kind of thing. There's a lot of other ancillaries, but this idea of employee engagement. So I opened up by saying we know turnover is going to happen in 2021. We're already seeing it. Some of it is just because, hey, there's got to be better opportunities, but a lot of it is you treated me like crap. Now you want me to stay as things are getting better. So there's all kinds of things happening. So there's 3 or 4 questions here. So number 1, what's the level? How much support is an employer responsible for regarding the overall well-being, physical, mental, and financial of their employees? What's the law say?
So that's a great question. So really, it's a relatively low bar. You have to provide a safe work environment.
Okay.
And you do not have to show them the promotion path, how to get you should.
It's not a legal issue.
It's not a legal issue.
Okay, let's start there.
So as long as somebody, as long as you're not aware that they're going to kill themselves today and don't have any obvious signals, your duty to take care of them or address that problem is relatively low. And most of the time you're protected as long as you have a policy that makes them aware of a wellness plan if you have it, or insurance, or the ability to seek help if needed. So I think it's a very, very low bar.
So now let's talk about the non-legal perspective. Yes. Your thoughts, and then I want to throw a couple of thoughts on this.
Of course, this is your expertise.
Yeah.
My thoughts, that I've learned a lot from you, is you need to have that mission, purpose, kind of that whole teamwork and personal touch approach, because especially now working remotely, it's a lot easier to take the recruiter's call. You don't have to worry about anyone overhearing.
Yep.
It's a lot easier to, wonder what grass is like on the other side. Time to reflect more than ever. And I think that if you're not checking in on your people, showing you care beyond, how much money they make your company, you are going to have the highest turnover in a long time.
And you just said something very specific, and this is the recommendation I give to everybody. We have to understand our team members. Now, let me be practical about this. Your definition of career advancement, you're younger than I am, could be very different than my definition of career opportunity and career advancement. Now, put that into the workplace. I've got a bunch of remote employees, and somebody says, well, my number 1 priority is career advancement. Okay. If they don't define it for you, if you don't ask the questions of your team to understand what's in their mind in the first place, that's where the disconnect. But what happens is we make assumptions about what career advancement means to you based on the lens that I look through it through, right? And then all of a sudden we have all this employee disengagement, but you don't know what's important. You have the topic of what's important to them, but try this trick. Next time somebody says career advancement or work-life balance or whatever it is, define that for me so I can help you achieve it. That's one of the key issues. I don't think it is just money. Money's important, especially after the last year.
Right.
Look, we didn't give raises last year. Most employers cut. We cut for a period of time, gave that back, but we didn't give raises. We're not until actually next month.
Yeah.
So, but that's not the only thing. Otherwise, I would have had a bunch of turnover too.
Right.
So we got to understand from the person's perspective how they define those things that are important to them. Stop making assumptions.
Agreed. And another point more on your expertise is there's 5 different generations in the workplace.
Oh, gosh.
And the communication style on how to have that talk, some might not be as comfortable to come out and to spit out what they want. And you have to figure out the right approach to get it out of them.
It's how you ask the questions and spending time with them to ask those questions. But that is a difficult issue. And I even find and I teach this stuff, and I even find myself sometimes talking to people going, are you kidding? How do you view it from that perspective? But I think a strong leader realizes you got to put their shoes on.
That's right. And I also think on the flip side, some managers are frustrated that maybe their team is not checking in enough or they're not seeing them.
Yeah.
And I think that the manager's got to continue updating job descriptions and making it clear what they want from their team, because no one can read minds.
Setting expectations is one of the critical things up front. Here's how we're going to communicate. Here's how often we're going to communicate. Here's what medium we're going to use to communicate what. I know it sounds overbearing, but once you lay it out there once and everybody kind of adapts to it, it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
And now communication is flowing much better.
And I think I can't figure out how to do a bright line that would satisfy everybody. It's nearly impossible because some employees are like, James, if you make me turn my camera on, it takes me an hour and a half to get ready.
Yeah.
I just lost an hour and a half.
Yeah.
But if the camera's off, I can't get that engagement or that feel as to how they're feeling.
Can you force them to turn the camera on? Can you say it's a
Johnny
policy?
Taylor, during his keynote speech, said he does.
Okay.
And I believe you can. However, I've seen plaintiff attorneys argue that by having the camera on, you might see in the background that they have kids or a religious icon.
Sure.
So to the extent you see protected class issues, you just have to make sure that's not factored into anything.
Again, probably hard to
prove.
Hard to prove it at any given time. The second question we already answered. So leaders are struggling to engage their teams. How do we train our leaders to get better? I think we both gave some advice on that particular one. Stop making assumptions. Get them to define what's important to them. Be clear about the expectations. Yeah. I think that covers everything. How do your employee? Different version, same question.
Okay.
There's a ton of talk about employee engagement in light of remote working. That's like the popular thing to talk about. Or the most used phrase is you're on mute, right?
That's the most, for sure.
How do you know when your employees need to be engaged? And is some of this just whining?
Yes, there's whining. I think that by not having the water cooler, people have too much whining inside. They want to get out when they have an avenue. I've noticed people that I don't talk to regularly, when I call them, then they just diarrhea of the mouth on everything. And I think that what I'm trying to do and teach is that even if you are that sympathetic ear for somebody and you let them whine, they're going to have that same problem again in the future. So why don't you figure out a solution to that problem and have them be part of that solution to make them, if there's not a solution, maybe they'll realize there's no reason to even whine.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think some of it is whining. And I don't know if you have, but I've even caught myself whining a few times over the past 18 months or 12 months or whatever.
It's fun to, share.
However, but I agree with you. If one of your team members comes to you and just whines, and you want to give that sympathetic ear, as you were talking about, and letting them whine, it doesn't solve the problem. It gets it off their chest. And sometimes, in fairness, people just need to get it off their chest.
Yep.
But we use this acronym, the 4 Fs. So facts, feelings, focus, fruit. What are the facts? You'll appreciate this, right?
That.
What are the facts of the situation in the first place? And then acknowledge how somebody feels. But you don't want to make it about feelings, because the emotional side of our brain takes over, and we do some pretty stupid things with the emotional side. So first, let's deal with the facts, acknowledge the feelings.
Right.
All right. Now, what's the focus, right? What do you want out of this situation?
Sure.
How do you want to deal with it? How do you want to solve the problem? And then the last piece that I call fruit is, what are the steps you can take right now? So now you're putting it back into that person's responsibility, helping them through it as a mentor, as a coach, as a leader, but it's their responsibility to move forward.
So the question I have for you is, it seems like you're spending all your time on the 4 Fs with usually the bottom performers or the whiniest people that may not be the most effective and most talented employees. So what's your thought on how to dedicate your time and where to focus?
That's actually a really great point. I have this conversation with HR professionals all the time. We're focused on dealing with the issues. The ones that have the greatest whine, the greatest voice, or the biggest problem. There's no question about it. But often we do it at the expense of the top performers. I'm of the opinion that if you spend 60% of your time with the top performers, you get a much better return on your investment. We forget about our top performers because we're spending 60 to 80% of our time with the people that are maybe shouldn't even be with your organization, but we want to try to make it work instead of really supporting those that can go to the next level. Now, there's always exceptions to the rule. Somebody who's having a tough time, you got to spend time with them if they've got the potential. But don't do it at the expense of your top performers and making assumptions that they don't need you. It's a great question.
Love that.
I've seen it as high as, some people say, spend 80% of your time with the top performers and only 20% with the bottom. I think it's a little severe. Just in my organization and in my own experience with my clients, I like that 60, 65, 70% model.
And I also think I've heard that people would brag no turnover is amazing, but I think you sometimes want turnover to show the top performers that you're getting rewarded and we don't tolerate a certain level.
Well, but I think that goes both ways. You even want to see your top performers move on. And people are like, what do you mean? Well, you're never going to hold on to everybody all the time forever. And if you do, you probably have the wrong shackles and they're not growing. If people are going to grow, be the person or be the company that helps them grow to a certain level. And if you can't offer it to them anymore, help them to their next role.
Right.
Because they're going to refer business back to you if you play it the right way in the first place. But we want to be selfish and say, I want to keep. And then to your point, the bottom performers, there's a time to say goodbye. Yep. Not callously, not without taking the appropriate steps, but it does show something when you don't do any of that.
And I think if you're too negative on the bottom performers, it's going to hurt the culture in the company because they're going to think you're going to gossip about anybody that leaves. So by treating them well on the way out and accepting it is going to make the culture that much better.
I've told, even in our leadership training that we do within the confines of Qualigence, I've told them many times, some of you will get to a point where you're going to blow anything we're doing out of the water and you will need to move on. And I will support you when you get to that point. Because if I had something to do with your success, it'll come back in spades.
Love it.
More success for us through the success of other people.
Yep.
That's a leadership thing that I think is some people are challenged with these days. But
you're right.
But and actually Terry talked about that a number of months ago when he was on, and Jake even kind of referred back to that as well. So
I think the 17-year or 30-year pension concept is long gone.
What's that?
Right, exactly.
Although I did have it recently, a family member say, who works in government and then kind of a quasi-governmental institution is like, I got to leave here because there's just no pension. I'm like, dude, I have never had a pension. I'm 50 years old and I still have never had a pension.
Exactly.
Anyways, one more question around employee engagement, James.
Yeah.
It seems that employee engagement surveys are useless. That's the statement. What's your advice to leaders? Does this open up legal issues, whether using one, an employee engagement survey, or not using one?
I think that employees don't believe their responses are anonymous.
Yes.
And I think you have to create somehow enough trust in that process where they believe it can truly be direct feedback that is anonymous. And there is great software out there, I believe, that could help with that challenge. But I think I've been on the executive side of receiving all of that information, and sometimes executives just brush it off as whining, and they don't really appreciate the 360. And I think you got to almost start at the top and say, are you ready to have this feedback and take some change, and maybe have the survey questions tailored to you understand the reason behind their conclusions.
So let me dig a little deeper on the legal side before I kind of give my thoughts on it. So let's say we run a employment engagement survey and we get the results, we do nothing with it. Somebody knows that there was an issue. They know we know about it, but we didn't address it. We didn't do anything about it. As the leadership, and not am I opening up the potential of a lawsuit that there was a problem, but we didn't address it, and we just kind of swept it under the rug because we didn't talk about it?
That is potentially a risk if the problem was some illegal act of racism going on and you didn't investigate or address it by any means. But most problems are non-legal. So I think just because it's a problem, no liability. I think another issue is if you were to take action and terminate people from the survey, the questions could have a disproportionate impact based on race or gender or religion, other things. So you don't want to make that 100% of your decision-making process. Of course. It's a factor.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a place for them. I do agree that the anonymous thing is a concern of everybody's, and most of the tools that are out there now, they are anonymous. Now, is there some ways in some of the smaller tools to figure it out if you have a small enough group, maybe based on department or direct report or so on. But I think there's some value. The biggest issue, I think, is when you get one, don't talk about it, do nothing about it. It just kills your credibility as a leader within the organization. I think that's a challenge.
And I think when I typically see it, a CEO will hand select 5 people to do the 360. Yeah. And that's a challenge because then you're like, well, there's only 5 of us responding. How honest can we be?
And why did he pick or she pick those particular their 5? So yeah, the only other issue that I sometimes have with this is sometimes we're not willing to have the direct conversation, so we kind of cover it with an anonymous employee engagement survey. So instead of me and you sitting and saying, we disagree on this, I'm going to survey everybody to see how everybody feels, and we don't really address the issue.
That is a great point. That you're assuming the CEO, whoever that executive is, doesn't have the skill set or courage to talk directly and ask somebody how they feel.
Now, we do both.
Right.
We encourage the direct conversation. Most of our clients try to encourage the direct conversation. But you got to build that trust in order to get there. You started with
I'm
that.
a big fan of healthy conflict, and you want somebody to not just be a yes person.
An attorney who's okay with healthy conflict. Is
Right?
there an attorney out there who's not?
Fair point.
Okay. All right. So let's. I want to move on to before we get to leadership and business. There was one question around recruiting and selection.
Yeah.
My hiring manager keeps creating job descriptions that don't exist. Okay. I'm sure as a lawyer you've seen this, but I know if you're watching and you're an HR professional, you've felt this. My hiring manager keeps creating job descriptions that don't exist. How do you recommend we deal with this? Is there any legal implications of creating these job descriptions for a profile that literally nobody has or two people in the world have? Are there any challenges? Could it be seen as discriminatory as well?
It could be seen as discriminatory because if you hire somebody that doesn't have the unicorn skill set, they're going to say, well, maybe that was pretext for discrimination to have this high bar. And if you would have had the real job responsibilities that you're willing to hire for, we could have included all these other people that felt excluded.
So do we have to focus on job responsibilities? And listen to me on this question for a sec before you answer. Or can we focus on the necessary results?
I don't see the legal distinction between responsibilities and results. I'm a big fan of focusing on results, and
Okay.
I think that would be a legitimate, non-discriminatory reason to make any type of decision.
And here's my example of this, and just follow me if this makes sense. So the manager says, or the hiring leader says, I need somebody with 10 years of experience because they're leading people. Okay, so the responsibility is you're leading people. My question to that would be, what do you want them to have learned in those 10 years? That to me is a little bit more relevant. And what do they need to accomplish with their team in the next year that 10 years is actually relevant? Because what I have found is that they get away from the 10 years and they start thinking about, I didn't really think about what I want them to accomplish in 6 or 12 months. I was more thinking about what their day-to-day responsibilities are. I think that's a problem. What's your take?
I think that's a problem based on the example that you gave.
Yeah.
I think that I understand in certain scenarios the other side. So I put out an ad for a lawyer actually yesterday, 2 to 5 years experience.
Okay.
And the reason why I did that was I felt that if I made it 10 years of experience or open-ended, I'm going to get a bunch of people that, want to instantly be an owner and be a boss and aren't
I want to be a partner.
I want to be a partner.
Got it.
And
Okay.
I want somebody willing to, still learn and work their way up and not feel entitled on day one without working their way through the system and getting along well with other people.
What if I have 18 months of experience?
So I was assuming, I agree. So I'm fine. Yes, I thought about making it 1 year to 5. The reason why I didn't is I figured the 1 year will apply anyway. I'm fine with 1. I didn't want to have it open and have everyone that didn't get a job out of law school that no one wanted to get flooded with 100 resumes. It was kind of the analysis. But could I focus on results? Maybe someone that inexperienced doesn't have too many results. I did say employment law specialty in these areas. But I think that in general, you're right. The 10 years experience is often unnecessary because I have some third-year attorneys on my team that operate better than 10-year attorneys that I know.
And that's part of my point,
Right.
and changing the conversation. And I get you want somebody who wants to work their way up. I get that, but could we potentially, and I don't know that we have an answer for this, instead of saying 2 to 5 years, actually phrase it that way, looking for people that are starting their career and want to learn.
Yeah.
And actually using that as the descriptors, take Marketing 101, I think that to me sounds like a better approach.
Agreed.
But I get it from your side too. I don't agree with it, but I get it.
If I had you in house, I would go with it. I'm fine with that.
So I think we want to have that conversation at some point. But so these job descriptions that don't exist, I guess my end comment to that would be focus on the results. And you're in agreement with at least that, and theoretically.
Absolutely.
I get some companies have to have the years of experience, and I think there's some, if you're a contractor to the government, there's some stipulations. Is that true?
There's different laws with the government. I'm a different attorney that advises on that.
Okay.
So there are many differences.
Okay, but don't make assumptions that only one profile can do the job. Focus on the results and people who have achieved the results.
I agree, but my challenge to you is it's not always easy to see the results.
Agreed. So,
Right.
but I think that goes both ways. It's not always easy to see the results. It's also not always easy to think about what results do I want
Right.
on some of these roles. And I just think we need to rethink that entire job description process. And here's the kind of the last piece to this because now we're assuming, again, what I just said, one profile and only one profile can do that role. We know more than one profile can do, even as an attorney, different backgrounds could potentially fill that need. They don't have to have exactly all these things.
Agreed.
Right? And when we do job descriptions where it's so specific, I think it gets us in trouble.
Yeah, I agree. But question for you, this has been bothering me, is that it seems like if you are a younger riser, you have kind of the framework to have good results in the future or the following year that you haven't already done in history. So how do you, a lot of employers want to say, show me the result the last 4 years, do a blend. How do you recruit a rock star that's still rising by saying, what have you done for me already?
So obviously still start with still start with the results and see what they have. Now put in situational in terms of, here's what we need you to achieve. So you've done this, which is great. It's not exactly what we want, but this is what we need you to do. How are you going to learn from the past to actually do that? What would be your approach? So first, focus on results. Second thing, focus on how they would approach it to get those results. Yes, they can make a bunch of BS. I get it. But at least it gives you some understanding of how they view specifically achieving those actual results. What's the steps you would take? Why would you take those steps? It almost seems like we're afraid to have some of those conversations.
Right.
In order to dig deeper. But then I would also ask them, what are the things that they've had to overcome to achieve even some of the results they've had? Because that'll tell you more about somebody than even the results that they've achieved.
And I think a lot of the interviewers aren't trained with what questions to ask.
I agree. I think they're not trained on the legal side. I don't think they're trained on the selection side. I think we've got a big issue, which is why the turnover keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And people are hiring. We're back to this, even in the midst of COVID. We're back to this. You got a heartbeat? The mirror.
I was going to say, if you have a pulse, you're hired. That's kind of what I'm seeing out there right now, and there's a lot of turnover. Recruiters are picking up the phone more than ever.
It's just, I haven't seen it like this in quite so many years. So we've got about 4 minutes because you've got another one to go to as well. So I'm going to keep going in order. Actually, no. David, put the last question up. This is the religion question.
Okay.
Maybe a little controversial, but here, and I don't know who sent this. It was actually texted to me. I have the number. No, I'm not. I will not track you down. My attorney recommended that I do not. This must be somebody who's pretty focused on the religion. My attorney recommended that I do not lead a Bible study in my company, as many people may feel forced to attend or could be offended. Is this true, and is there any legal implication to this?
Great question. And right now, the Supreme Court is expanding the definition of a religious company or ministerial right. So I guess the question is your mission at all religious-based? Like, for example, I forget the name of the store that's closed on Sundays, right? So is it
Hobby Lobby?
Hobby Lobby.
Yeah.
So is there some religious factor in what you do? Or like if you're a school that teaches religion, you can discriminate based on religious as well. I have clients that believe in the Ron Hubbard method. And the Ron Hubbard method, they believe that it makes good managers. So they're not
the Scientology stuff.
Yes. So they're not focused on, I need everyone to be a Scientologist. But I believe some of the messaging could also make people less depressed, more motivated, better people, more empowered, know how to work well with each other. So there is a case in Florida that says, that's blatantly illegal, we'll sue you. So what companies are doing is offering accommodations. If you are uncomfortable with this, I will let you go to Steve for leadership training that is a different program. I'm offering that way. If you have a sincerely held religious belief, I'm by law required to accommodate that to the extent I'm able reasonably to.
So let's use me as an example. So I led a guys group here.
Yeah.
I have a certain faith that I focus on, but I made it optional. I said, if you want to join, come and join. If you don't want to join, I don't care.
Yep.
And I had 6 guys show up. Is that wrong?
I don't see that being illegal.
Okay.
But let's say those 6 guys end up getting the next 6 guys to get promoted.
Okay.
People are going to then say, because there's a perception now that my religion was taken into account in the promotion decision. It's the same thing. People that play basketball together, go to the same church, smoke
there's
cigars,
almost
play
anything.
poker together.
Yeah, I mean,
You have to just be aware of the perception of favoritism and make sure that perception, ideally you don't want perception of favoritism for any reason, but you have to make sure there's no perception for a protected class. So if you were going to fire somebody, I would want to make sure maybe you have, it's not just you deciding, maybe there's some others so you could make it more clean that you don't have any unconscious bias in your decision.
I think that's fair enough. It's not going to necessarily stop me from doing it,
right.
but I absolutely agree with that. So I know we're up against a hard clock for you. So thank for all of you that are watching. If you have comments, if you have questions, make sure you send them in. Again, if you're okay with just asking them out loud, go ahead and put them on any of the social profiles. If you want to send it to me directly, you can get me at steve@steveloas.com. You can text me at 734-837-8500. You can text James.
734-649-1313 or email at james.reed@dinsmore.com.
This is hopefully creating an opportunity for you to ask those questions that maybe you don't want to ask internally. You want to ask it of somebody else. If you want to come on, again, as I said earlier, we're giving you that opportunity. We'll invite almost anybody on.
Right.
Right. But we'll invite you on. Let's have a good dialogue. Let's have a debate and be the examples of how you can disagree with people and still have a conversation so we can at least acknowledge that somebody else has a different
if you have a different point of view,
Yeah.
we're happy to address that during our next one.
I'd love to see an attorney to come on that has a different point of view than you.
Every plaintiff attorney will, so let's bring it.
This is true. So thank you. It's been great to have all of you, James. Again, thank you for joining. This has been another Leadership in Legal. If you missed this or if you're watching it recorded, you know where to get it. But if you think there's somebody out there who needs to see it, send them the link. Sign up for all the notifications. We do this once a month, generally the third Thursday of the month, around 11 o'clock. The next one we may have to do a little bit later in the day because we're thinking of something a little bit more relaxed and special. So it may be 2-ish, 3-ish. We'll communicate that out in a very short period of time.
And we may be in person when allowed.
There is no question. So
Yes.
Leadership in Legal will end up being at least in person and maybe online, both, for those people that are not here in Michigan.
Right.
But if you're in Michigan and you want to sign up and be part of the audience, part of a group, and I don't mean like us up here and you sitting in the audience, but having a real conversation, my guess is we'll get to the point where we'll have hundreds of people attending one of these in the next couple of months.
No doubt.
So if you're interested, let us know. James, again, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And we will see you guys all soon.